Welcome to Military Analytics. Ukraine and Russia have been fighting for over a year, but now the Russian military's war effort is largely exhausted. The strategic attacks of the Ukrainian army against the Russian army have a great impact on this. The most recent of these attacks took place last night when a Russian railway was hit in Crimea. Let's examine together how the war effort of the Russian army was exhausted and the strategic attacks of the Ukrainian army. Late last night, gunshots and explosions were heard in the town of Tsankawi in northern Crimea. Judging by the videos posted on social media, Tsankawi was attacked by a kamikaze drone. According to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, an incident occurred as a result of the explosion of caliber missiles transported by rail in the northern region of Crimea. The leader of the Russian-appointed city of Tsankawi confirmed that the railway was attacked by drones. The airstrike successfully blew up the Russian missile train and the railway in the Crimea. Ukraine acknowledged the explosions, but did not openly take responsibility for the incident. If confirmed, this represents a rare action in Crimea, a territory occupied by the Ukrainian military since 2014. The blasts continue the process of Russian disarmament and prepare to free Ukraine's Crimean peninsula from Russian control. Multiple buildings caught fire and the electrical grid was damaged in the attack. A railroad worker was also injured. Ukraine reported that the destroyed Russian caliber cruise missiles had an operational range exceeding 2,500 kilometers on land and 375 kilometers at sea. Russia accused Ukraine of attacking the Black Sea Fleet with a drone in the Crimean port city of Sevastopol in October 2022. It was stated that 9 unmanned aerial vehicles were used in the attack that damaged a warship. Ukraine did not claim responsibility for the attack. So where were the missiles destroyed by Ukraine going? For some geographical reason, Russian rail traffic is heading north towards Kherson Oblast before heading south to the port of Sevastopol. The presence of calibers in the railway yard in Saki is perfectly understandable, since Sukhoi is the hub connecting the Russian railway to Kherson and Sevastopol. Assuming Kherson was under Ukrainian control, the caliber missiles would probably be deployed to Sevastopol and from there to the Black Sea Fleet. So how will it be possible for the Ukrainian army to take back Crimea? Kherson, which is currently touted as the gateway to Crimea, is under the control of the Ukrainian army. So this gives the Ukrainian army a huge advantage, even though Mariupol, which is the backdoor of Crimea, is now under Russian control. The Russian defense is weakened due to the attacks of the Ukrainian army on the Russian troops there. In addition, HIMARS, owned by the Ukrainian army, puts the Ukrainian army in a very advantageous position for long-range attacks. However, the fact that the Black Sea Russian fleet still exists on the Crimean coast is a reason that complicates Ukraine's Crimean offensive. For this, the Ukrainian army continues to take important steps to weaken the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Although Ukraine did not take responsibility for the attack, this attack undoubtedly undermined Russia's war effort in a big way. Some experts consider the attack to be a retaliation by the Ukrainian army to Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to Crimea and Mariupol. These may not be empty thoughts. Russian President Putin made a surprise visit to the Ukrainian port of Mariupol, which was captured by Russia after it devastated most of its forces. An official video shows Putin driving through the streets at night and talking to people. This trip is believed to be Putin's first trip to Ukrainian territory that came under Russian control after the beginning of the war. Ukrainian officials likened Putin's trip to the criminal's return to the crime scene, stating that he came to see what Putin did and personally see what he would be punished for. Other Ukrainian city officials in exile said that Putin visited the destroyed city at night to avoid seeing it in daylight. Russian officials said Putin went to Mariupol by helicopter. In the video, he is seen in the car with Russian Deputy Prime Minister Marat Kusnulin, describing how the city was rebuilt. The Kremlin said that the decision to walk around the city was made spontaneously by the Russian leader. Putin also visited the city's Philharmonic Hall, which should be used for trials of captured Ukrainian forces before being released in a prisoner exchange. The Russian leader is also reportedly meeting with senior military commanders in Rostov-on-Don, a Russian city just east of Mariupol. So what happened in Mariupol? Mariupol has been under Russian control for more than 10 months after being devastated in one of the longest and fiercest battles of the conflict. Ukraine says more than 20,000 civilians have been killed there. An analysis estimates that 90% of the buildings were damaged and about 350,000 of the pre-war population of about 500,000 were forced to leave the area. A group of Melitopol residents said that Rylianusiu is conducting an expensive campaign to rebuild the city and win the hearts and minds of its people. The aim is to assimilate Mariupol and make it the owner of Russia. Russian officials say 300,000 people currently live there. The conflict saw Russia hit the Mariupol theater, where hundreds of civilians took refuge. The building collapsed and at least 300 people are believed to have died there. Ukraine and human rights groups say the attack constitutes a war crime. The United Nations said the Battle of Mariupol was among the events for which Putin and his regime could be held legally responsible. The International Criminal Court said it has issued an order for Putin's arrest in connection with the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. This means that if he sets foot in any of the court's 123 member states, he can be arrested. Putin also made an unannounced visit to Crimea to mark the 9th anniversary of Russia's annexation of territory from Ukraine. He visited a new Russian art school in Crimea, a children's summer camp, and future cultural projects such as the New Russia and Christianity museums. Russian officials reported, although the Ukrainian army had unarmed and entrained soldiers in the beginning of the war, President Zelensky is not leaving the people and the army alone. The fact that the vast majority of the people joined the army or took up arms and showed the courage to defend their country to the last person, as Putin claimed. Afterwards, Western states giving the Ukrainian army the most advanced weapons and training Ukrainian soldiers, as well as sharing intelligence with the Ukrainian army, caused the Ukrainian army to gradually pass both psychological and physical superiority. The Ukrainian army recaptured 70% of the Russian-controlled Ukrainian territory in a very short time, with a major offensive launched last fall. Afterwards, the Ukrainian army blocked the supply routes of the Russians, and the Russian army was almost unarmed. And then the Russian troops suffered huge losses on the front line, causing the superiority to pass to the Ukrainian army. Of course, the importance of intelligence sharing and the right strategies cannot be ignored here. Unlike the Russian army, the qualified and disciplined commanders of the Ukrainian army and intelligence units working in coordination with foreign intelligence units successfully hit the coordinates where the Russian elements were located in the situation we are in now. We see that the Ukrainian army is preparing for an attack again and is planning a major attack against the final target of Crimea, Kiev. Authorities have pledged to liberate all areas under Russian control, including Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014. At this point, we see that the Kiev authorities have stood by their promises and liberated the Russian-controlled regions one by one. It's difficult to know what awaits us in the coming days, but we sincerely believe that Ukraine's freedom efforts will come to an end. Tanks are indispensable war machines for an army. The Ukrainian army absolutely needs powerful tanks to withstand offensive operations or enemy spring attacks. The Ukrainian army has Soviet-era T-72 tanks. Bradley and Stryker combat vehicles will be sent from the USA, and Challenger, 2 tanks from the UK. But Ukraine, which wants to wipe out Russian tanks from the front lines, needs more effective tanks. Here, 2 Leopard 2 tanks come into play. Therefore, it would not be wrong to describe Leopard 2s as force multipliers. A country draws all the attention in the shipment of these tanks, which we describe as force multipliers. Despite the prudent stance of the Western states neighboring Poland, which made a bold move to transport tanks to Ukraine, could change the course of the war. The place of Poland, Ukraine's most staunch supporter, both in Europe and in the world, has changed. The heart of Europe now beats in Warsaw, as it is known. Poland formed a tank coalition shortly after the war started. With the participation of various countries, the coalition expanded and support for Ukraine increased. Now, some of the 14 Leopard 2 tanks that Poland promised to Ukraine are about to reach the territory of Kiev. Poland became the first Western ally to transfer modern Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Ukraine took delivery of the remaining 10 of the 14 Leopard 2 tanks promised by Poland after Ukrainian soldiers completed their training to operate this equipment. Also, in addition to 14 Polish Leopard tanks, this battalion includes 4 tanks from Canada, 8 from Norway, and 6 from Spain. 14 Leopard 2 tanks delivered from Poland to the Ukrainian armed forces arrived in Bakhmut and began to take an active part in the defense tasks of the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukrainian military personnel completed their training on Leopard 2 tanks in Poland. All Polish tanks at Warsaw plans to send to Kiev are now in Ukraine. As a reminder, the first 4 of the 14 Leopard 2 tanks were delivered to Ukraine by Poland on February the 24th, the anniversary of the large-scale invasion by Russia. Warsaw will also provide 60 PT-90-120 tanks. Of course, Poland's place in this war is not limited to the Leopard 2 tanks. Let's dive into the relations between Poland, Ukraine, and other Western allies that have developed since the first moment of the war. As a frontline state, Poland has played a crucial role since Russia began massing troops on the Ukrainian border in preparation for the invasion. Due to its geographical location bordering both Ukraine and Belarus, Poland has become an important route for Western supplies to Ukraine and a safe haven for Ukrainian refugees. On February 24, 2022, when Russian tanks entered Ukraine, neighboring Poland opened its borders to millions of Ukrainians who had fled their country, and ordinary Poles lined up to welcome refugees at their homes. Like the Baltic states, Poland has quickly become a major defender of Ukraine's cause within the EU and NATO, sending large quantities of weapons. Poland's size, location, and infrastructure make it the West's most important gateway to Ukraine. That is why Poland has become the main transit country for international aid. In addition, Poland led lobbying efforts to impose harsh sanctions against Russia and support Ukraine with strong political, economic, and military assistance. It donated major military aid to Ukraine, including the main channel of military supply and 300 tanks from its own stockpiles. Polish leaders were among the first to arrive in Kiev as artillery still bombarded. The city and the country supports Ukraine's early accession to the European Union. Poland, on the other hand, is a NATO state that is in a vulnerable position in the Ukraine war, which partly explains why it has been so proactive in providing military support to Ukraine. Poland is closer to the center of the storm than any other NATO member. There is a risk of further immersion. For this reason, Poland is forcing its other allies to do more. On November the 15th, 2022, after multiple Russian missile attacks on Ukraine and its energy infrastructure, a missile hit an area in southeastern Poland, killing 2 people. This event showed the potential risks Poland faces. In response to this event, the German government offered to supply Poland with Patriot air defense systems. But Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak suggested that these systems be supplied to Ukraine. The German government agreed to consult within the alliance. Accompanying the arrival of Patriot systems for Poland and Ukraine, several hundred German soldiers will be stationed in Poland. About 90 to 100 Ukrainian soldiers are expected to be trained by the Polish-based Germans to operate a Patriot battery for Poland. The best way to prevent escalation is to provide Ukraine with the means to defeat Russian aggression. Contrary to the rather restrained language of the U.S. administration, the Polish government, quite bluntly, states imperialism must be stopped and defeated. Otherwise, it will be a constant threat to the free world. Also in January 2022, Poland announced that it would provide arms, ammunition, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, and has since provided aid worth $3 billion. On February 17, 2022, a Polish-British-Ukrainian trilateral agreement was announced to improve cybersecurity and cooperate on energy security. As the military conflict developed, Poland became the second-largest arms supplier to Ukraine, sending missiles, drones, tanks, and other military supplies, and as a major route to arms supplies from the United States and other NATO countries. Poland was even ready to send MiG-29 fighter jets, although not approved by the United States. In another development, Germany and the USA made the headlines in recent months by deciding to send tanks to Ukraine. However, the unsung hero behind this landmark decision was actually Poland. Polish leaders were particularly instrumental in their efforts to persuade Berlin of the need to supply Ukraine with modern tanks. This was the latest example of Polish leadership. Poland's leading role in the European response to Putin's invasion reflects the country's extensive experience of Russian imperialism in both its Tsarist and Soviet forms. Since Poland's accession to the European Union in 2004, politicians in Warsaw have been warning Europe of the growing threat posed by a resurgent and revisionist Russia. Moreover, Poland's prominent role in European security policy today is not entirely new. Since joining NATO in 1999, Poland has become a security element on the alliance's eastern flank. This was made possible thanks to Poland's strategic location and its extraordinary economic growth, which helped finance the rapid modernization and expansion of the country's armed forces. The Polish army is currently ranked as the 20th most powerful army in the world. Poland has in many ways set the standard for European humanitarian intervention in the Russian offensive against Ukraine since the invasion began. Poland has accepted more Ukrainian refugees than any other European country, while also providing a range of benefits such as access to health and education as well as employment opportunities. Poland is also one of the leading contributors of military aid to Ukraine at per capita rates. Poland sent more military aid to Ukraine than almost any other country except the Baltic states. In fact, it is possible to summarize Poland's point of view towards Ukraine in one sentence, and we can make this summary with the words of the Polish Prime Minister. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki stated that he would do all kinds of material and moral assistance by saying we will not just watch Ukraine's bleeding. Spring season is coming. The weather is getting warmer. The Ukrainian front lines are softening. And most importantly, a new phase of the conflict begins. Ukraine must completely clear the Russian troops on the front lines, both for its own independence and for neighboring countries. It is very important for Poland that Ukraine defeats Russian aggression. Otherwise, the security of Europe as a whole and Poland in particular will be at risk. We know who we are. We know what we are fighting for, and our determination is not lacking. There are a lot of developments in the east. Here, Russian forces concentrated their efforts on expanding the buffer zone to the north of Bakhmut to protect their flanks in the face of the imminent Ukrainian counteroffensive. They started pushing along the highway and even got notable results. But because they got too far from their defense and were operating on a very narrow front, Russian losses have doubled and continue to stay at more than 1,000 killed per day. Last time I told you that one of the main axes of Ukrainian counterattack was recently revealed by Russians because the concentration of Ukrainian forces in Mankivka and neighboring settlements has substantially increased. I also told you that in response to this development, Wagner's focus more than a third of their forces on this 5-kilometer front line in order to create a buffer zone as fast as possible. The freshest reports provided by the Ukrainian spokesman of the Eastern Group of Forces noted that the intensity of fights around Bakhmut increased even more after establishing control over Dubovo-Vasilivka. Russian forces struggled to move directly to Orhovo-Vasilyevka because of a natural barrier in the form of another hill. Russian forces shifted their fire on the Ukrainian strongpoint near the highway, and after they breached it, they could approach Ukrainian positions on this hill along the tree lines. Such a development exposed Ukrainian positions in Orikho-Vasilivka, and according to Russian sources, Ukrainians had to retreat from 2 checkpoints inside the village out of 4 due to the overwhelming crossfire. The main goal of the Russians is to get to Minivka, exactly where Ukrainians have their forces concentrations. The idea here is to start attacking them before they launch a counterattack. This way, Ukrainians will get entangled in positional fights, which will complicate offensive actions significantly. The second thing Wagners are doing is trying to breach the most fortified area inside Bakhmut, the SM industrial area. Some sources reported that Wagners have already entered the northern part of the industrial area. However, reports with recently made geolocated footage only confirmed that Russians maintained positions no closer than 800 meters from this complex. The main idea of attacking the most formidable defenses is that if Wagner somehow managed to breach it, then Bakhmut will fall very rapidly, and there would be no point in making this massive counterattack. But such a risky and aggressive approach comes at a great cost. Since Wagner forces launched this highly attritional westward expansion, Russian losses have spiked once again. And if last week Russians were losing approximately 600 soldiers, then over the last 3 days, Russians are losing almost twice as many soldiers. Russian sources reported that Wagner's advances are constrained by artillery and mortar strikes as well as air strikes because Wagners are advancing along the very narrow line to the north of Bakhmut. Ukrainians are engaging their artillery units not only from Konstantinovka, but also Siversk. Ukrainian mortar units are shelling Russians from safe positions behind the canal in Novo Markovo. Advancement along such a narrow line also means that Russians are getting too far from their air defense, which makes them vulnerable to airstrikes. Yesterday, it was confirmed that Ukrainians are freely engaging up to 6 fighter jets to bomb Russian strongpoints. Today it was also reported that 3 helicopter gunships are operating at low altitudes for the long-running battle for Bakhmut. With that in mind, the spike in Russian losses is not surprising. In order to compensate for such levels of losses, the head of Wagner Group, Prigozhin, doubled down on expanding recruitment efforts in Russia. At first, they were opening recruitment centers at sport clubs. But lately, Wagner Group has also started focusing on youth. Wagner Group has recently opened 6 recruitment centers in schools. Russian Ministry of Education in Apatite included Wagner personnel at a career guidance lesson to tell heroic stories and promote the service in the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group likely aims to recruit more impressionable recruits through this youth-focused campaigns and instill in them Prigozhin's extreme ideology. Some Russian officials are even advertising contract service in unusual places. For example, it was recently revealed that a Moscow-based psychiatrist is calling on suicidal men to join army and die for a good cause. Overall, Wagner forces are trained to cancel the Ukrainian counteroffensive at any cost. Prigozhin understands that right now, the success of his 7-month-long campaign is at stake. And no matter the losses, he must somehow prevent it. Many analysts are saying that Ukrainians will likely launch their counteroffensive on Monday or Tuesday. However, Ukrainians are still controlling their positions on the biggest hill in the area, which does not allow Wagners to even clear the village. So Ukrainians should still have a little time to wait for the ground to dry up in order to increase the chances of their success.